The first light of dawn had barely touched the horizon when Clara Bennett stumbled through the dry brush, her bare feet tearing against jagged rocks and thorned vines. Every step sent shards of pain up her legs, but she could not stop. Not now, not ever. Her arms bore the bruises and welts from last night, red and purple, mottled with dried blood. Her chest heaved, her lungs burning, and yet fear pressed her forward, sharper than any blade. Her stepfather's house had never been a home. Since her mother died 3 years prior, the walls had become her prison. The neighbors whispered about the screaming, but no one came. In this small desert town, silence was a luxury. Some people used to kill their curiosity and their conscience. The man she ran from, Jonas Cray, was not a father. He was something darker, a creature whose smiles never reached his eyes and whose hands struck with the authority of a tyrant. Clara had learned to dread the nights, the drunken tirades, the creeping sense that every shadow could swallow her whole. That night had been the worst. Jonas had come home staggering, clutching a bottle as if it contained the reason to live, or perhaps the will to destroy. When he lunged, she fought, twisting and falling across the floorboards that groaned under the weight of their struggle. Her screams had no audience, only the desert beyond the window, listening silently. When she finally ran, she tore through the door, leaving shoes, dignity, and hope behind. The desert stretched before her, empty and merciless, yet freer than the house she had left. She moved blindly, guided by instinct, her hands scraping against dry earth and thorned plants. The wind whispered through the cacti, carrying with it the ghosts of a childhood she would never reclaim. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Her body throbbed with open wounds, old scars reopening under the harsh sun. Her head spun with exhaustion and adrenaline, yet she could not stop. She could not allow herself to collapse, to be reclaimed by the life she had fled. By the time the first pale rays of sunrise struck the horizon, Clara had fallen near the edge of a dusty trail. Her breaths came shallow, her skin seared by the sun's early light. Then she heard it, a steady rhythm, hooves striking against the hardened earth. Her pulse skipped. Shadows emerged on the horizon, a single horse moving with the confidence of someone who belonged to this land, not as an intruder, but as its quiet master. The rider approached, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded leather duster and a wide-brimmed hat. Dust clung to his boots, and a scar ran faintly along his cheek, like a memory etched in flesh. His eyes, pale and measured, met hers. Clara froze behind a bush, wrapping herself in dried palm leaves she had grabbed in desperation. Her body shook, not just from the pain, but from terror. "Please, go," she whispered, unsure even what she meant. "Go before he sees me. Go before he comes again. Go before I break completely." The man dismounted slowly, hands relaxed, movement deliberate. He didn't speak, didn't raise his gun. There was a calmness about him, the kind that told her instinctively he was not like the others. Years of war and desert life had taught him the way fear clings to broken souls. He removed his jacket, draping it over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. Clara shivered under the weight of the cloth, the first sensation of warmth she had felt in weeks. "My name's Samuel Whitaker," he said finally, his voice low, steady, almost gentle. "You're safe?" Clara's lips trembled. She wanted to speak, but found no words. She only nodded faintly, the desert wind tugging at her hair, whispering promises she was too afraid to believe. Samuel lifted her carefully onto his horse, her head resting against his chest. The ride was silent, save for the rhythmic clop of hooves and the sighing wind through the canyon. Clara felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. She had been carried before, but never like this, with care, with intent to protect, not to control. When they arrived at his ranch, a modest homestead on the edge of the desert, Samuel laid her gently on an old couch near the fireplace. He moved with precise efficiency: firewood, boiling water, clean cloths. Every motion was deliberate, quiet, grounding. Clara watched, unsure if she should trust the first man in her life who had offered kindness instead of cruelty. "You don't have to say anything," Samuel said finally, taking a seat across the room. Just rest." The silence stretched like a fragile bridge between them. For a moment, Clara closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull her under. She dreamed of freedom, of wide skies, of a life unbroken by the shadow of her stepfather. When she awoke hours later, sunlight streaming through cracked windows, Samuel was still there, motionless but watchful. "You're helping me because why?" she whispered, voice brittle. "Because somebody once helped me," he replied quietly. She didn't know what to say either. Days bled into nights. Samuel moved with quiet efficiency, repairing fences, tending the animals, and offering Clara only what she needed, never asking for more. Clara, in turn, began to help in small ways. Watering plants, feeding the horses, tidying the barn. She laughed occasionally, brief flashes that felt like lifelines. Samuel noticed but never commented. He only let the moments exist. Nightmares continued to visit her. Screams echoed in her mind. Shadows stretched long and threatening. Each time she awoke, she found Samuel seated by the fire, waiting silently until she fell back into a fragile sleep. Two broken people learning the rhythm of coexistence, neither forcing the other, neither running away. But the desert never allowed peace to last. Samuel knew it, and Clara felt it. Somewhere beyond the hills, there were eyes watching, a man, searching. Jonas Gray was not finished, and others had learned the same. One afternoon, the wind carried a change, dust swirling heavier across the horizon. Samuel stacked hay when he saw the figure, boots dragging, the hatred in his posture unmistakable. Clara froze at the window, color draining from her face. Words were unnecessary. Samuel's hand instinctively rested on the shotgun at his side. The man stopped at the gate. "Hiding her, old man," he growled, voice low and ragged. Samuel didn't answer. He set down the pitchfork and stepped forward. "She's safe here. You best turn around." A dry laugh rasped through the air. "You think you can keep her from me?" the man sneered, advancing. Clara stepped onto the porch, hands shaking, but voice steady. "Go away. You've done enough." Anger flared. Samuel moved faster than anyone might expect, intercepting the man before harm could come. A brief scuffle followed, fists and weight colliding, dust swirling around them. When it ended, the intruder lay in the dirt, defeated but alive. Samuel's words were sharp. "Come back, and it won't be the same." The man spat, glaring at Clara. "This isn't over." Then he vanished into the shifting storm clouds, leaving only the wind to howl across the plains. Inside, Clara shook, still trembling but alive. Samuel handed her a cup of water. "It's okay. You can breathe." For a moment, peace settled like a thin sheet over the land, fragile but real. Clara realized she had survived. Samuel realized he had found purpose in protecting someone more than he had in years. But both knew that the desert never forgives for long, and the past writes faster than anyone can outrun. If you're still with Clara and Samuel, take a deep breath and imagine yourself in that desert wind. Where would you run? Who would you trust? Hit the like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the storm returns. Because in the wild, the next sunrise often brings more than just light. The days following the first attack were tense, though outwardly calm. Rain had soaked the desert, leaving the earth soft and fragrant, but Clara's nightmares had only grown louder. Every creak of wood, every rustle of wind through the brush made her heart leap. Samuel noticed, but he said nothing, letting her set the pace. Trust, he had learned, could not be forced. Clara had begun helping more around the ranch, moving with cautious purpose. She mended fences, fed the horses, and even learned to clean the guns Samuel insisted she keep nearby. Each act, small and deliberate, was her reclaiming of power, her quiet defiance against the terror that had ruled her life. Then came the unexpected visitor. A horse's hooves clattered across the soft earth, faster than any normal ride, carrying a rider Samuel did not recognize. The man was young, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. His black coat clung to his frame, wet from the morning drizzle. He dismounted, bowing slightly, but with a hardness in his posture that spoke of danger. "Samuel Whitaker?" the man asked, voice smooth but edged with steel. "That's me," Samuel said, steady, his hand resting on the stock of his shotgun. My name is Caleb Drake. I have information about the girl. Clara stiffened behind the window. Every muscle tensed. Information about her. That could only mean one thing: trouble. Samuel narrowed his eyes. You mean Clara Bennett? You'd better tell me why you're here, Caleb, and it better be honest. Caleb's gaze flicked to Clara, then back to Samuel. I was sent by people who have been tracking her. They know what happened to her stepfather, and they know about the money he stole. Samuel's jaw tightened. Money, tracking. He had hoped that leaving the town had severed all the chains of the past. But clearly, the past had teeth. Before Samuel could respond, Clara stepped out onto the porch, hands on her hips, standing taller than she had in weeks. Why are you here? What do you want with me? Her voice was steady now. No tremor, no plea. Just strength edged with the caution she had built around herself. Caleb smiled faintly, unnervingly calm. Your stepfather wasn't acting alone. He stole more than money. And the men who lost it want it back. And they're willing to kill to do it. The air turned heavy. Samuel's fingers tightened around his gun. Clara felt a stomach drop, dread filling the spaces between her ribs. You mean you? She asked, suspicion sharp as a knife. Caleb shook his head. Not me. I'm just the messenger. And with that, he left her words hanging in the damp desert air. Samuel motioned for her to come inside. They locked the doors, but the sense of invasion lingered like smoke. Over the next days, Samuel prepared the ranch for an attack he knew was inevitable. Every door was barred, every window reinforced, and every horse hidden. Clara learned to load the guns, to move quietly, to listen, not just with her ears, but with her gut. Samuel had taught soldiers before. Now he taught her survival. Then came the second wave. One evening, just as the sun bled red into the horizon, hoofs thundered across the plains. This time, there were more than two riders. Figures blurred in the dust storm Samuel had anticipated, and Clara knew in her chest that this was worse than before. The first man to appear was Jonas Cray himself, his face twisted with hatred, but not alone. Behind him were two others, mercenaries hired by the same men who had tracked Clara. One was larger than Samuel, lean and quick, the other wiry and cruel-eyed. They surrounded the ranch, circling like predators. Samuel grabbed his shotgun. Stay behind me. Don't fire unless I say so. Clara's hands shook, but she kept her grip on the rifle. She had learned something vital. Survival was not just about running. It was about standing. And she would stand if she had to. The first shot cracked through the air, a warning. Samuel fired again, then ducked behind the barn, forcing the attackers to scatter. Clara followed, firing carefully, listening to Samuel's commands. Dust filled her lungs, the wind carrying gunpowder and the scent of rain. But then something unexpected happened. One of the attackers, tall, quiet, wearing a hat that shadowed his eyes, stopped mid-stride. He raised his hand, not to shoot, but in a pause that made Samuel's blood run cold. Leave her, the man said to Jonas. You don't know what she can do. Samuel froze. Clara's heart leapt. Could this be a new ally or another trap? The man's voice carried authority. Jonas hesitated, eyes narrowing, then cursed. This isn't over. Before Samuel could question, the man spurred his horse and disappeared into the dust. A warning, a protector. Clara didn't know, but something had shifted. After the dust settled, Samuel led Clara inside. She had fired her rifle, scared, trembling, but alive. Her chest heaved, but for the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of pride. She had fought. She had survived. You did well, Samuel said quietly, his eyes scanning her for fear. But he found only determination. Better than I could have hoped. That night, the wind carried a cold bite. Clara sat by the fire, bandaging a shallow cut across her forearm. Who was he? She asked finally, voice soft. Samuel hesitated. Someone from my past. A soldier. Someone I thought I'd left behind. He knows more about this world than you or I ever will. Clara's mind raced. Someone from his past? And yet he had arrived just in time. Could the desert hold secrets even Samuel couldn't control? Days passed, and with them came tension, trust, and tiny, tentative bonds. Clara's laughter returned, fleeting but real. Samuel noticed a change, the way she carried herself, the way her eyes no longer darted at shadows. But he also knew the storm was far from over. Then, the twist that would change everything. One evening, Samuel returned from the barn to find Clara standing at the window, staring not at the horizon, but at a letter pinned to the doorpost. He walked closer. The paper was worn, edges singed. Written in sharp, unfamiliar handwriting, it read, "You can run, girl, but some debts are never forgiven. Meet us where the desert begins, alone, or she dies." Clara's hands trembled. Samuel's jaw tightened. This wasn't just Jonas anymore. Someone else had entered the game. Someone powerful. Someone with reach and ruthlessness. "Who?" Clara whispered, voice breaking. "I don't know yet," Samuel admitted. "But whoever they are, they know about you. They know about me. And they're coming." For the first time, Clara realized the stakes had shifted. The desert was no longer just a refuge. It was a battleground. And she was not just running anymore. She was a target. What would you do if someone from your past came back with vengeance in their eyes? Could you survive the storm? Or would the desert finally claim you? Hit the like button, comment where you think Clara and Samuel should go next, and subscribe so you don't miss the thrilling conclusion in the coming part. The morning sun rose over the desert like a warning, pale and relentless. Clara stood at the edge of the ranch, scanning the horizon. The wind carried no warmth, only the scent of dust and tension. Samuel approached quietly, carrying the twin rifles they had prepared for the inevitable. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed a storm. "They're coming," he said, voice low. "I can feel it." Clara nodded, gripping the rifle in her hands. "Then let them come. I'm not running anymore." For the first time, Samuel saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen briefly weeks ago, now stronger, sharper, tempered by survival. She was no longer the frightened girl who had stumbled into his ranch. She was ready to fight. The riders appeared as shadows on the horizon. First 2, then 5. Dust kicked up under their hooves, carried by the wind like smoke from a hidden fire. Jonas led them, his face twisted with hatred. But behind him was the tall, silent man from before, and a new figure, masked, imposing, radiating danger. Samuel's grip tightened on the rifle. "They've brought reinforcements," he muttered. Clara's jaw hardened. "Then we fight together." The ranch had been fortified over the last few days, thanks to Samuel's meticulous preparations. Barricades, hidden trenches, and vantage points gave them an edge, but the odds were still grim. The first shot cracked through the morning air. Samuel fired, and the taller man dove for cover. Jonas cursed, firing blindly, desperation in every movement. Clara aimed carefully, each pull of the trigger calculated. Her hands no longer shook. She had trained, and survival had sharpened her instincts. But then came the twist. The masked figure revealed a trap. He had set fire to the eastern barn, flames roaring higher than the morning sun. Smoke billowed, choking the air. Horses whinnied in panic. The attack had escalated beyond a simple raid. It was a siege. "Clara, get the horses out!" Samuel barked, rushing to control the chaos. She ran, weaving through smoke and flames, guiding the animals toward safety. For a moment, she felt the old panic rising, but it was met with the clarity of purpose. She would not be a victim again. Back at the ranch, Samuel faced Jonas and his mercenaries. Every shot fired was precise, a dance of survival honed by years in battle. But the masked figure was clever, using shadows and fire to advance. Samuel realized he could not face them all at once. He needed a plan, and fast. "Clara!" he shouted. "Now!" She understood instantly. Samuel led Jonas and 2 others into the narrow canyon behind the barn, a path only partially visible. Clara positioned herself at the top of a ridge, rifle steady. When the attackers pursued, she fired at the supports of a makeshift barricade Samuel had rigged. Rocks and logs crashed down, pinning Jonas's group in the canyon temporarily. The masked figure cursed, realizing the trap. He turned to retreat, but Samuel was waiting. With a burst of skill and strength, Samuel charged, grappling the man in a furious clash of fists and knives. Each move was deadly, honed by years of survival, every strike carrying the weight of vengeance and protection. Clara watched from above, heart hammering. Then, as Samuel was pressed against the ground, she stepped forward. Her rifle aimed, her hands steady. "Stay down," she shouted. The masked man froze, seeing the resolve in her eyes. The moment stretched, the desert holding its breath. Then, the figure lowered his weapon, raising his hands in surrender. Clara and Samuel exchanged a glance. Trust was tenuous, but for now the immediate threat was neutralized. Jonas, however, was still free. He lunged, desperate, a knife in hand. Samuel moved faster, tackling him into the dirt. Clara ran forward, her rifle pressing against Jonas's back. "It's over," she said, voice hard. "You can't touch me again." Jonas sneered, then slumped. Realizing he had no escape, Samuel quickly bound him with rope, while Clara kept watch. The fight was over, or at least this chapter of it. The masked figure finally removed his mask. Clara gasped. It was Caleb Drake, the man who had warned them weeks ago. But now his motives were clear. He had been sent to test her, to ensure she could survive, and to help Samuel protect her. Not an enemy, but an unlikely ally. Samuel lowered his rifle, exhaustion and relief mixing in his eyes. "You kept your word," he said to Caleb. Caleb nodded. "She's strong, and she deserves to survive." Clara looked around at the aftermath. Scorched earth, broken fences, and the bodies of men who had brought terror into their lives. She felt something she hadn't in years, control over her own destiny. The desert was harsh, but it could not break her, not anymore. That night, the three of them sat around the fire. Samuel handed Clara a cup of water. "You were incredible today," he said quietly. She smiled faintly, exhaustion etched on her face. "We did it together." Samuel's eyes softened. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. You survived, and that's what matters." For the first time, Clara allowed herself to breathe without fear. She had faced her past, confronted her tormentors, and survived. She was no longer the girl who ran blindly into the desert. She was a woman who could stand, fight, and live. The next morning, Samuel and Clara walked the ranch together, surveying the damage. Horses were safe, fences repaired, and the fire smoldering into ashes. The desert, though harsh, felt alive with possibility. Clara finally spoke, her voice steady. "What happens now?" Samuel looked out at the horizon, the sun rising over the endless plains. "Now, we rebuild. You stay or you go, but wherever you are, you make it yours." She nodded, a small smile forming. "I think I'll stay a while." As the weeks passed, life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Clara learned the land, planting flowers and tending animals. Samuel continued his work, quiet but present. Trust grew, not forced, but earned, built from shared survival, a mutual respect. Yet the story left space for the future. Shadows of the past had been confronted, but new ones could rise. The desert had taught them this. Peace was temporary, but courage, trust, and survival were eternal. If you've stayed with Clara and Samuel through the storm, the gunfire, and the desert, take a deep breath. Think about the moments in your life where survival felt impossible. What kept you moving forward? Drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe so you can ride with us through the next Wild West story. Because sometimes, even in the harshest deserts, hope blooms. And sometimes, even the broken can find a place to call home. The sun rose higher, illuminating the ranch, the fields, the quiet strength in two souls who had faced the unthinkable. Clara looked at Samuel, and for the first time, words were unnecessary. They had survived, they had endured, and in that endurance, they had found peace. The wind carried no threat now, only the promise of a tomorrow they could shape. The story of the storm, the fight, and the desert was theirs, and theirs alone.